Okay, good morning, guys. We're doing science now. So hopefully you have your science book open to page 78, and you also have your notes in front of you that I sent via the email. Now I'm going to try to do a little quickie lesson on the stuff that you read. So if you haven't read this already and you haven't printed out the notes, then you need to pause the video and do that first. Otherwise, this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to you. Okay? So we are moving into a new chapter. We studied a little bit about the bacteria kingdoms and the protist kingdom and the fungi, and then we spent more time on the plant kingdom. Now we're going to move on to the animal kingdom, the last of the kingdoms. Now, the animal kingdom is broken down into two groups: invertebrates and vertebrates. Vertebrate means has a backbone. And we know from ourselves, if you touch your back, you can feel that big long bone that goes down the middle of your back. Vertebrae. Invertebrate, the prefix in, means not a vertebrae. So that we're going to first study about animals that do not have a backbone. Okay? Alrighty. So the first thing that I want to remind you about is one thing when we want to like subclassify within the invertebrate group, we can start to look at things that are different about animals. So most animals have symmetry. Now you know from math class what symmetry means. Symmetry means that if you were able to fold the organism in half over an imaginary line, all the parts would match up exactly. However, not every single animal has symmetry. People have symmetry. Sea urchins have symmetry. A starfish will have symmetry. You know, there's lots of symmetry out there. So now we get back to the backbone and no backbone. If you look on page 79, there's a whole chart of the different subgroups within the invertebrate group. There's mollusks, Cnidarians. Now, Cnidarians begins with a C, but the C is silent. Okay, so just like in science, you don't hear the C. Well, you don't hear the C in Cnidarians. Okay, CNID, but it's Cnidarians. Sponges, not the kind of sponges that we use to clean our kitchen, although they are made to resemble the natural sponges. Echinoderms, sometimes they're called echinoderms. I was always taught that they were called echinoderms. I checked with Mrs. Callahan. She thought they were also called echinoderms, but I had a parent last year who worked in the science field who told me I was pronouncing it incorrectly. It's echinoderm, and when I did look it up in the on Google and asked to do the pronunciation, it did say the other pronunciation too. So I might fall back to the way I learned it, echinoderm, but I'm going to try to remember to call it echinoderm. Flatworms, roundworms, segmented worms. Those are three different groups of worms. Okay. Now we did yesterday. We watched some videos because we couldn't do the lab. If we were in school, I would have brought in worms. That's what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. I've been bringing in worms, and you got to touch them if you want. You didn't have to. And we looked at them, and we did the wet paper towel and the flashlight and then the touching. We did all of those in class, but you know, we can't do that. So I tried to find videos of what would happen for you. Well, earthworms are segmented worms. But then there's also these roundworms and flatworms, which we'll learn more about a little later in the chapter. And then the last group is called arthropods. So we have mollusks, Cnidarians, sponges, echinoderms, then the three kind of worms: flatworm, roundworm, segmented worm, and then arthropods. Okay. Well, let's talk about some of these invertebrates. Let's start with sponges. Okay, sponge is the simplest kind of invertebrate out there. Okay, most are shaped like a sac and they have an opening at the top. Its body is made of two layers of cells and it's hollow inside. So sponges obviously have to live underwater. Just think of what happens to your kitchen sponge if you leave it out to dry. It gets small and dry and hard, okay? It can't live like that, just like the natural sponge can't live like that. So they live under the water. Generally, they stay in one place, and when they have offspring, the offspring can float in the water. So the only way it could move would be if the current carried them. They can't move on their own. Okay. Cnidarians. Cnidarians are an animal that has tentacle kind of parts to it. At the tip of each of those tentacles, there's a stinging cell, which is what they use to protect themselves. They also use it to stun their prey so that they can eat. So it protects as well as enables them to catch food. Some stay in one place, but others, like jellyfish, that's a type of cnidarian, can float or they can even swim a little bit. Okay. I'll try to do a demonstration tomorrow for you on how the jellyfish can move through the air. I can do a kind of a model for you. The third group we're going to talk about are mollusks. Now you know you've seen mollusks before. If you've ever collected a seashell, probably a mollusk used to live in that shell. They come from the kind of invertebrate that has a soft body. Now remember, they don't have a spine to support them, so they have to have something else hard around them. And in this case, it's a shell. Every mollusk has a shell. The shell of some mollusks are inside their body and others have it outside their body. Most of the mollusks live in water. Some mollusks, when they're adults, like clams and oysters, they'll attach themselves to one place. Sometimes if you've ever been to the beach, you might see some of the mussels, those black shells, and they're like attached to a piece of plant. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Others, like squid and octopuses, they can swim freely. So some adult mollusks will attach themselves and have their shells on the outside, like clams and oysters and mussels, and some have it on the inside, like squids and octopuses. They swim freely. Then there are some mollusks. Remember, I said most live in the water. Not all of them live in the water. The snails and slugs, they live on land. Okay. All right. The fourth kind we're going to talk about is an echinoderm, which is how your book also says it, echinoderm. And an echinoderm has spiny skin. It also has an internal support structure. Okay, so that's what holds it together inside. And that inside part is called an endoskeleton. Skeleton, you know what a skeleton is. It's the bones and stuff inside you. It's the rigid, in us it's bones. It's a rigid material inside of an echinoderm. And it, because it's inside their body, it's called an endo, E-N-D-O, endoskeleton. If it was a shell on the outside, like a crab, that would be an exoskeleton. Okay, so endoskeleton means it's inside the body. Exoskeleton means it's on the outside. Inhale, you take it, but you exhale by breathing out. So X means out. Exoskeleton. What else did I want to tell you about echinoderms? A starfish is an echinoderm. You might say, that doesn't have a lot of spines. Well, spines don't have to be pointy and sharp. Spines can be bumpy in a way. And if you look at the outside of a starfish, that's exactly what you're going to see. Okay, I think that's all we're going to cover for today. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.